Begin in Afghanistan, where the Taliban say they have captured a 9th provincial capital, and here are the 8 so far confirmed. The Taliban have been on a 5-day blitz seizing provincial capitals, including one just 200 kilometers from Kabul. And Washington's special envoy to Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, is in Qatar to try to push the Taliban for a ceasefire. And despite the escalating violence, U.S. President Joe Biden gave no hint of delaying the deadline to withdraw all American troops by August the 31st. He urged Afghan leaders to come together and fight for themselves. And our reporter Sultan Faizi is joining us from the capital, Kabul. Hello there. The Taliban claim to have captured a 9th provincial capital, Faizabad, and overnight they have captured Pligoumri, which is just 200 kilometers from Kabul. You are in Kabul right now, Faizi. What's your own plan? Are you going to stay there or are you going to leave as soon as possible?
Well, it has been very harsh, since the violence has been raising, and I have been speaking to my colleagues, journalists who actually fled Taliban-controlled areas. I could give examples of Jowzjan province and Sarpol. They are trying to make their way to Kabul, and it has been very, a desperate situation because people in Kabul are feeling disconnected with the northern region of the country, and people are trying to withdraw their savings, and there are thousands of people trying to get their passports processed, and also there are hundreds of people knocking the doors of embassies and travel agencies to get visas, any possible visa to get out of the country. This is the unfortunate thing happening here in Kabul, and it has been harsh for us, not only reflecting the reality from the ground in one spot, and we are feeling limited to go outside and talk to people and talk to those who are vulnerable now. So we are feeling more limited than the past. Even a very small explosion could affect the situation in this atmosphere. And, it's not only the first wave of the journalists leaving the country, but there are many others who have been working in provincial levels, and they are also afraid of the situation because the current violence and this deteriorating situation actually leading towards an ambiguity.
Obviously, people are very scared over there, and India is urging its citizens to leave Afghanistan due to Taliban's gains after the United Kingdom also did the same over the weekend. So are there concerns among foreign nationals and diplomats?
Exactly, since both US and UK and yesterday India called their diplomats and citizens to evacuate and leave the country, this actually has grown more because people are more scared of the situation that only Afghans could be left behind. And that is quite frightening people, because it actually shows that people are afraid of the repeat of the history. So, apart from those, diplomatic missions, apart from the foreign citizens that are actually concerned or leaving Afghanistan, as I mentioned before, it has been also harsh for civil society members, for activists, for artists, for filmmakers, for journalists. So it's a hard decision, to make. But I personally have to leave this country because I had to evacuate my family. I got a lot of threats for my daughter's school and many other things that actually, does not allow us to operate actively.
Right, and the Washington Post is reporting the U.S. officials believe that Kabul could fall within 90 days, much sooner than the previous assessments indeed. Does the situation on the ground reflect this?
Well, that's quite a negative message for the current atmosphere. However, the government officials are now trying to retake those provinces or those districts that have fallen to the hands of the Taliban. President Ghani traveled to Mazar Sharif early this morning alongside with several other former jihadi leaders to work on an operation to retake those areas. But this means actually more violence, more conflict, and more war or more airstrikes. So this is quite concerning. But again, you know, the level of optimism is quite low now. The reason is that the political efforts have not been giving a result solid on the ground. So this is something has been turning to a disaster, because we have been seeing the effects of the violence. Now Kabul is planning to have 10,000 internally displaced settled here in the city. So could you imagine, like, what about the more than 1 million people who internally displaced in the recent weeks and months? This is a disaster. This is a tragedy for Afghan people, what is going on the ground.
Right, and Sultan, what could happen to Kabul if, let's say, Taliban does seize the city?
Well, already there are threats in western Wardak province that is connected to Kabul. Also in Kapisar, that U.S. carried out bombing airstrikes there. But there are also optimism that any change for Afghanistan politics would not affect Kabul militarily. People who are optimistic about the fact that the foreigners are still here, they are hoping that a military takeover will not be the way, but a political change could affect the environment or the atmosphere. But there are, of course, mistrust between people and the government, because the government has been carrying out attacks within the cities that is actually driving people to more fear and concern. If the war was not within the cities, then the hope could be more about the capital Kabul. But now it seems different, because people are losing hope that the war could be taken anywhere at any part of the country, no matter if it's the capital or any other major city.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Sultan Faizi, reporting from the Afghan capital, Kabul. Please stay safe there. Now, Afghanistan's latest wave of violence has left many residents in shock, as Sultan Faizi just said. And some people say they worry about an uncertain future and the potential trauma from the conflict. And Mohammed Hadiz Pardis reports from Kabul.
Some residents of Afghanistan's capital say it is difficult to hope for the future when war has become part of everyday life. Muhammad Yasser is a medical student in Kabul. He is one of many who is concerned and anxious about the country's situation.
If the Taliban want to take control and govern, they must choose a political way to proceed. Fighting in war will bring destruction. As a student, I'm not hopeful for my future. I don't know what will happen next.
The United Nations has warned that the war in Afghanistan has entered a new, deadlier and more destructive phase. The Taliban have made dramatic advances, staking claim over some provincial capitals. Siddiqa Fikrat describes the situation in Ghazni before she fled the southeastern province.
As you can see, the situation is deteriorating. My home is in Ghazni, and I study here. I fled Ghazni 2 weeks ago because of insecurity. It's very difficult for me because my entire family was caught in the fighting. In Ghazni, the Taliban are not allowing girls and women to go to the bazaar.
The Taliban offensive has displaced tens of thousands of people, pushing Afghanistan's future into a humanitarian crisis. Amrullah Saleh, the country's first vice president, has called on international organizations to help those seeking refuge in Kabul. Ahmad Shakib, who lives in Kabul, says the Taliban's rejection of peace talks is not helping the situation.
I can say that it's out of control. We've been seeing the fall of districts and even provincial capitals, and obviously it's affecting all our lives.
No matter how far off it seems, Shakib still says he is hopeful peace will be restored.
However, the warring parties in international community emphasizing that there is no military solution for the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan But since US troops began its withdrawal from Afghanistan, the violence intensified and the Taliban continues its rapid military gains in Afghanistan. Mohammad Hadis Pardes, CGTN, Kabul.
And our Professor Wang Jin is joining us from Xi'an. He's a specialist in the Middle Eastern Studies at China's Northwest University. Professor, welcome to Global Watch. Now, a spokesperson for the Taliban told Al Jazeera that the group is committed to peace negotiations underway in Qatar. Should we be hopeful at that at all? Do you think a breakthrough can be made?
Yes, Dongyin, I think the hope is always there, and we should always harbor the hope for the peace and stability. Especially, we know that in the war, the people that the groups that suffer the most. But if we look at the reality, especially the recent developments of the battleground, I don't think the hope is very apparent, and I think the hope is very limited because the offensive from Taliban is still there, and the conflicts between Taliban and the Afghan government are still there. And if we look at recent developments that our colleagues from Afghanistan reported, that I think that in the future more crisis, more conflict will emerge, and more people might suffer. So I think the hope is very necessary, and the hope should be necessary, and that's why international society should encourage and facilitate the talks and dialogues. But maybe the hope is very limited given the very complicating battleground situation right now, Dongyin.
Especially when Taliban is edging into the capital city, Kabul. They're just 200 kilometers away from the city. What would happen to the situation on the ground in the country if they does seize the city?
I think if they seize the city, whether or not they can seize the city is still uncertain, because although they are just maybe 200 miles ahead, but it is very difficult to say that whether or not they can retake the city, because maybe the Afghan government forces can retake more areas from Afghan Taliban, and maybe that more offensive might be launched by Afghan security forces. But given the very complicating situation in Afghanistan, I think the Taliban might occupy and gain more territorial gains in the future. So I think that the situation there will be very complicating, and that's why we say that, as I stress, more international pressure, and especially more international efforts for the dialogue and the negotiation should be facilitated and should come as soon as possible to save the people, to help the Afghan people. Tony.
Well, talking about international efforts, I don't know the U.S. attitude or comment is one of the efforts or not, because Biden says Afghan leaders must fight for themselves. While Taliban making so many gains in such a short period of time, could we see a situation where they demand the U.S. leave the country completely, and how might Washington react to that?
I think the United States attitude is a little bit, it's actually a little bit complicating and very, very, very interesting, because we look at the United States attitude. On the one hand, he calls for the ceasefire from Taliban, and also called for the fight from Afghan government. But on the other hand, the United States try to do something that, especially try to launch the airstrike against the Taliban to show that the United States is still concerned about the situation in Afghanistan. But we cannot forget that it was the United States unilateral agreement, regardless of the approval of the Afghan government with the Taliban, that in 2020 that led to the withdrawal of United States forces from Afghanistan and led to the imbalance of the situation there. And it was the United States unilateral military withdrawal without a form and information of the Afghan government that led to the political and the military vacuum in a lot of districts and areas. So I think if the United States really want to be responsible, really want to do something, they can, but they don't want. So I think the United States rhetoric is very, very irresponsible. It's very, very irresponsible. The United States should do something to help Afghanistan to facilitate the peaceful and dialogue, and to help and to save Afghan people, to do the responsibility of the United States themselves.
Well, the citizens in Kabul are certainly very scared, and so are the foreign nationals in the city as well. CNN is reporting the U.S. is under very active discussions to further draw down the number of employees at its Kabul embassy. Do you think this could turn into a kind of chaos we saw with the fall of other cities such as Saigon in Vietnam, for instance, when American forces had to rush to flee the country?
Yes, you are right. This is a little bit similar. It's actually very similar to what happened in Vietnam before the Saigon was taken. Especially if you look at United States now is decreased its staffs and the staff and the military personnel in Afghanistan and try to withdraw them as soon as possible to in avoidance of the capture or seizure by the Afghan Taliban. But I think this is still a little bit different because at that time the Vietnam is supported by also intervened by Russia, by China, and also other powers to fight against the United States supported government. But right now it was only under attack from Taliban, and the international society, including China, Russia, and Iran, are trying to help to pacify the tension rather than try to intervene and try to do something negative. So I think we have to know that United States, that's why United States, yes, it's a little bit similar to the Saigon, but the United States should do something to show that they are also a responsible power in the global area.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Professor Wang Jin from China's Northwest University, joining us from Xi'an. Thank you very much for your insight.